Hey everybody, I'm here with a good friend of mine, Evan Addams, for our table talk today. Evan is a kingdom-minded entrepreneur. He's started multiple businesses, been involved to the ground up, but our friendship has spanned many years and we've had many conversations. And today I want to bring you into one of the many conversations. And we're going to touch a ton of topics, but today is going to be really, really good to see how we can integrate work and worship. Evan Addams, good friend of mine. We've had a ton of great conversations, so I wanted to bring you in today and just talk. So you don't know, is this hard for you to not have an agenda? Not at all? It never seems like it.
No. I think kind of the opposite. I love not having an agenda.
Yeah.
I think, my background of charismatic whatever is like the more off the cuff, the more spirit led. Like that was the crazy ratio we built up at the time. So I feel great. In my business career, I've had to form this like love for agenda and preparation.
But you're not naturally wired that way?
No, I'm wired for like just make it up as you go.
Yeah.
And to this day, I think some of my favorite business successes, like my favorite acute moments, were when I had to make something up.
Yes.
But over the long story of it, the consistent, positive outcome, I attribute more to like preparation and planning. And so I deeply appreciate that.
You can't live, from just unplanned to unplanned.
I had some leader at some point early in my career gave me a good sports analogy. He said it's like the difference between college football and pro football. Like in college, you're Reggie Bush, you can run for 500 whatever. In the pros, everybody's fast.
Yes.
Like you can't just run.
Yes.
You have to know every piece of playbook. It's about strategy. It's all these other pieces. And if you rely just on raw skill and hope you're going to be stronger, faster, more athletic than everybody, once you get to a certain level, that's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
You have to prep and do those things. But I love the moments where it is just time to run and have a good time and not really care about being too strategic and just letting things go. So I enjoy those conversations.
Yeah.
AKA this.
That's why I love talking with you though too, because we'll get together, just grab a coffee or whatever, and every time we end up talking about something, and I'm like, man, this is so stinking good, and it's never planned. And so I actually like to have more unplanned conversations because it's genuine. The idea of like the goal of this is to help people learn how to think, not tell them what to think. Right. And so to see someone processing in real time with a real actual conversation between two guys who love the Lord, who are doing the very best that we can to expand his kingdom on the earth through the gift that he put inside of us, I think that's going to be beneficial for a lot of people. But, specifically with you, a lot of businesses, business, kingdom, entrepreneurial, all of that. That's funny. That gift of like kind of being able to walk into a room, not have a plan and just go with what feels right is a beautiful gift, but it scares a lot of people, right? It's funny. A lot of people who are wired opposite would make fun of me as a kid, and I thought something was wrong with me. But honestly, man, like I had ADD real bad, so I had to learn to trust my gut as opposed to like I couldn't sit long enough to think through a process of something. So now my gut is really sharp, and it's balancing it out just a little bit. But kingdom businesses, man, let's talk about that. I think it would be great to talk about.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I love what has happened. I would say, I'm going to call it I say this in honor to him. So I think about it like the Tim Keller movement. It's hard to over-attribute something to one man. I don't mean to deify the guy. But in the concept of faith and work integration, and I grew up understanding the concept of calling, but there was always this really simple, like, pastors a certain level, and then you have jobs, and maybe it's great to have a great job so that you could just give more money to the church. And that was really the mechanism and flow of how God's kingdom worked. I went to great youth camps and things, but there was always this strong emphasis on a calling to go be a traditional missionary or calling into the ministry. And so when you go to a youth conference in 1998, there were not many of us walking out like, wow, I'm so inspired to go be a great businessman, right? It was like everybody had this somewhat farcical, like, I'm going to go be a pastor. I'm going to start my own church. And like, you know, and
one guy said to me one time, he's like, why do all the hot girls have to be missionaries? One of my youth students. It's like, I don't want to be a missionary.
No, I mean, that was like a real thing, right? Like this, and you had to, right? And so if you were a businessman, you just had to kind of purify or like, you know, launder your money into the kingdom by way of tithes and offerings. And that was like in the businessman that did a reverse tithe of 90 and 10 just was the ultimate, you know, the ultimate leader. And so
was that, okay, I'm going to ask you something, like, was that, how did that come about? Do you feel like some of that was manipulation, or do you feel like that was genuinely where people were at the time?
I mean, there's certainly some manipulation out there. I think genuinely that was how people were in their pursuit of God. That was what made sense. When you follow the evangelical church in the United States from, you know, basically post-Civil War, I mean, late 1800s into the Billy Graham era and beyond, there was this, the prayer of salvation was the most important. It became this really strong, the only thing that matters is eternity. The only thing that matters is your soul. Get people saved. So these big conferences were all about getting people saved. And money supported that. And that was sort of this sales-like mechanism that became really popular.
Yeah.
And
you're even saying like a process is created now.
Yeah.
For mechanistic decisions.
Yeah. And I have no, you know, I don't, you know, but
it still could have been genuine.
Yeah, the last thing I want to do is say that any of those salvations were manufactured or twisted or manipulated, or that God wasn't in those things. You know, I think over the course of our thousands of years of written history, like God's character is to work through these semi-broken processes that we create as humans. And he's constantly just like, you know, working through that in a beautiful way. And so that's what humanity is. When I had said the Tim Keller movement, and what really has transformed my life is this my basically college and post-college life, is this true concept of an integration of faith and work, which at age 16, 17, I would have described as, you do your work and you pray with anybody that'll let you pray with them, or you have a Bible on your desk, or you open up meetings with prayer. And that was faith and work integration to me. Maybe what you do is you have your business tithe or something like that. And I have no problem with any of those things, right? I have no problem with somebody who wants to have a Bible on their desk to constantly push the envelope and have conversations with people. But when we talk about faith and work integration, it's about this worship by itself. The work that God has created you to do is worshipful. Regardless of if you've also said to somebody, if you died tonight, would you go to heaven? And saying that sinner's prayer, as we call it. I mean, that's a beautiful piece of things, but doing your work, if you're a carpenter, making this table in a beautiful way gives glory to God. Building a business, and the phrase I borrow from one of my business mentors is entrepreneurship is creating the world how it ought to be. And so as we use our gifts, as a pastor, as a businessman, as an investor, as a carpenter, a mechanic, whatever it is, you're pushing things forward, humanity, culture forward in a way that they ought to be, more towards this constant redemption that we're seeing all around us. And that is where work is really meaningful. That's where work is more than a 9 to 5. That's where work is more than making money to just give to the church. You know, work by itself is a redemptive thing. And so that's been my inspiration as an entrepreneur, if you want to call me that. I would say it's finding these areas of life that says, if we do this a little differently, if this industry would perform a little bit more this way, if we could create this software that would transform human behaviors a little more that way, this whole industry will shift a little bit closer to how it ought to be. It takes an arrogance to say that, but as we say how it ought to be, that's towards a more God-glorifying manner. And simple examples of that, you might find an industry that thrives on a lack of transparency. You could go back to the mid-'90s, selling stocks, anything where you're kind of buying and selling over the phone. I love the proliferation of softwares that laid out pricing and allowed people to, for logistics or buying and selling shares, or what you and I get to experience every day on Amazon is unheard of for that time, where we have this transparency of how things are priced. And so much of sales and logistics up until the mid-'90s was based on what consumer is lazy enough to not look up a better price somewhere else or pick up the phone and make another phone call, or who can you build up enough trust with that you can sell that paper to them for whatever price. And when somebody came in and across all those industries and say, actually, there's a better way to do this. We're going to take these tenants that are, you make the most money when you can convince enough people, and we're going to change the tenants of X industry into, we're going to create transparency and choice and interaction and collaboration. That's a beautiful thing. So I think there are opportunities like that worldwide. They exist today. They've existed. They will exist. And those are how I think, some examples of how we create the world ought to be.
That's fascinating. I haven't thought about that. But now that you're saying that, I was just thinking the other day of how my grandfather's small business, we could look at it and say it was, killed by Amazon. The transparency opened up. But the reason they shopped at my grandfather's small business was because they trusted him and they knew him, and they said, oh, he's not going to take advantage of us. Right. Like the car dealer, where do you want to go take your car for? You want to go to a mechanic that you actually know. Yeah. It's probably one of the few industries that, you're like, this has to be relational now. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. So there's a big shift from relational to transactional, but I haven't thought about it that way. That's great, man. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are you learning now? Tim Keller passed away. Right. And so what was the transformational book?
I guess I'm done learning at this point.
Yeah, you're done learning from him, huh? Yeah, whatever. No, but like that, I didn't realize, he passed away, what,
couple months
2 months ago?
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah.
He's unbelievable, man. Like his work was fantastic. What was your book that you read?
The first piece that was completely life-changing was Every Good Endeavor.
Oh, yeah.
Not to rehash the concepts I just had talked through, but it opens up with a series of quotes from John Coltrane, who I appreciate as a jazz musician, not as a theologian.
Yeah.
Because you open the book in the theology mindset and you read how Coltrane talks about the worship of music, what it means when he's creating something beautiful in jazz and what that does in his relationship with God. It's from the start, this eye-opener around, of course, I know that God created the universe. Why have I compartmentalized beauty into the things that happen on a Sunday morning? Why is that worship, but somebody who is creating beautiful jazz music?
Right.
Someone who's great with their spreadsheet. Someone who hangs cabinets perfectly, right? Like whatever that might be, those are beautiful things. And I have...
But the church historically thought that way.
Yeah, that's right. Historically, yeah. And I don't want to say it's the United States' fault. I love our country, right? But we got a little... we like winning in the United States.
Did you see the Arnold documentary on Netflix?
What, the recent one?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Good old Arnold stuff.
Specifically, even with this topic, it's outstanding. Just how he was a millionaire before he was an actor. Mm-hmm. Like he was getting into acting. He was obviously a bodybuilder. Yeah. I think Mr. Olympia, like what, 18, somewhere around there, 19 years old. He was a teenager though, which is absolutely crazy. Yeah. But he talks about all of that. But a lot of the emphasis toward the biggest came through his feud with Sylvester Stallone, right? think about it. Like they've got grenade launchers on their shoulders, and then one's driving like a massive Hummer, so the other one gets a tank, and then, you know, they just go back and forth with it. But there was an emphasis on bigger. Yeah. I also think about it, and I'd love to hear your take on this. So there was a time, I'm not saying that but rapture theology kind of bothered me, because every time I would talk about rapture theology with somebody, they were afraid. And I'm like, wait, if you're afraid like this, then I think you're getting it wrong. But there was a mindset, I think, when we misinterpret any end times teaching, it's that Jesus is coming back, so what I do doesn't matter. Yeah.
Well, luckily, there's entire letters of Paul that are written about that, right? Like that was a symptom in the early church was, as you read Thessalonians, I mean, the difference between 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, you see that layout of there's either this overreaction or underreaction to the reality that Christ will return. And especially when we think it's happening tomorrow, right? But I have really enjoyed, I mean, I think one of the other verses that we take out of context, but it's plastered on a lot of our walls and t-shirts, is Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you. That's awesome. Those things are amazing. When Jeremiah was a contemporary to the exile, and a lot of his prophecies were written with instruction and guidance to the exiled Israelites, right? Yeah. So overlapping in their years was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And, you know, we hold them up as like the ultimate rebels. One thing we don't like to talk about, they were governors. So they were not the ultimate rebels who were Israelites that were from the start constantly rebelling. They saw Jeremiah's prophecy, which had said, flourish where you are, live for the city. Where you are, God has you.
That scripture is so powerful.
And as you read that as an Israelite who's over there, you're like, okay, God's got a plan for me, a plan to prosper me. And by the way, there was redemptive, and then God will bring you back, right? So Nehemiah comes later, that whole thing. Studying Nehemiah from an entrepreneurship perspective is one awesome thing.
Yes.
But if you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you're getting your marching instructions from Jeremiah, reading this, and so you're flourishing. You are diving into this kingdom, not to say that you fully endorse it. You're doing everything you can to build your farms, to flourish, to do well for the city, to bless the people around you. And they were doing that. They had a line, and the line was, we will not worship this other God. But when they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar knew, his people knew who they were. They weren't just schmucks, right? They were three leaders. They were three governors. And so when I think about this context of how we live actively, there is, you call it the rapture, left behind, whatever it is,
it's any end times theology, that is misinterpreted out of fear.
And we go in this sprint of I just got to get everybody saved and nothing else matters. But the work we do, the flourishing that we do ourselves and what we create, and there's a fine line. I'm not a humanist, right? I don't think flourishing by itself, just the Maslow's hierarchy of needs of achieving self-actualization, that is not what we're here to do, right? We are not just about this humanist approach. But when you take that context of what Jeremiah was speaking to those Israelites, you realize, okay, God has us here right now, kingdom of heaven here on earth, right? And so that's in my businesses and our personal life and our family, we pray today, let the kingdom come. Today, what does that look like to establish our family, our routines, our businesses, a little bit more with allowing the kingdom to come into those. And as we take that advice, you realize okay, well then we have work to do while we're here, and work is a good thing. And I think we get a little twisted on the difference between work and, I've heard it laid out as work and toil. And toil was this result of sin, and it's hard, but work and taking care of the garden and cultivating, that's pre-fall, right? Those are beautiful, beautiful things. I wouldn't be surprised this is not a theology. I wouldn't be surprised if there's work to do in heaven. Like,
well, I was actually going to lean into that a little bit because, okay, we're talking about the Edenic mandate essentially, right? So God gave Adam work. He had to tend to the garden, name the animals, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over it. That was prior to the fall.
Yeah.
So there was work prior. And I love to tell this, like when I was a youth pastor, I'm like, look, or even college pastor, was great. Like girls were dating. I'm like, look, Eve came into Adam's life after he had a job, you know, but he had a job and that was before the fall. Like work wasn't a result of the fall.
Yeah.
Toil. I like how you delineated that.
Yeah.
You know?
And it was, I mean, the work was challenging. Like, you know, you think, well, how hard could that be? But like, think about Adam naming all the fruits and vegetables. Picks up an orange and it's like, well, that's easy. Orange. But then he picks up a carrot and he's like, oh man.
Orange too.
Yeah, what do I do now? Right?
That's a good pastor joke, good dad joke. I love it. I might use it sometime.
I think it's paraphrased from somebody there. But still, it was this way you think about God's walks in the evening.
Yeah.
Think about finishing a good day of work. A good day of work. And think about the joy of of walking with your family in a breeze of a beautiful garden that you've cultivated, and how I think about the rhythm. If that was your life, where you go and you do your work, you cultivate, you work with your hands, you see results, and then you enjoy the fruit of that work by walking through and seeing it and appreciating it, and that was your daily cadence. In one day of that week, you sit and you just enjoy, and that's pretty awesome, right? But it's even more rewarding when you are participative as a creature of God into what that is. Like you are cultivating, you are doing something. It's not all just handed to you. And I think you see that God's character pops up on that again in the direction about margin and how to create room for the poor and the foreigner, of leaving these edges around your fields and what you don't pick up. It was never even about gather all your foods and then give this much away to the poor and the foreigner. It was create opportunity to work, to come in and participate in the cultivation of gleaning these extra pieces of wheat as they go. It seems like a pretty innocuous of all the crazy things you can read through the Old Testament books of law. There's some wild things in there, and this kind of fits at first. Like that seems like a silly thing until you realize that concept of creating the space for cultivation and work, that specific one, is exactly how Ruth came into the kingdom, came into the Israelite family.
Yeah, wow.
And David and Jesus. Like Jesus is not in the line of Jesus in that case if that space was, if that little verse, if that little command of God wasn't there to create room for work. So this concept of cultivation, there are great seasons for each of us. Vacations, particularly longer seasons where we are not as active per se, right? There could be family things, could be a time at home, whatever it is. I think we are designed to do work. And I don't mean to sound like a workaholic, but I think that I get to lead worship on Sundays at church. I get to sing, or I'm playing the piano or something, and that is a joy for me, and I'm honored to do it. And some people say to me, I wish I could worship like that. And there are things in their mind.
Yeah.
But I know them, and I know what they do on a daily basis is worship. They are great accountants. They're great chefs. They're great moms. They're great dads. This work that they're doing is, I would say, more worshipful than what I get to do on a Sunday morning of leading some songs. That they're offering themselves as a living sacrifice, right? That's just, it's so scriptural and so sound. But it motivates me. Yeah.
Are you saying that the knowledge of God in our work is what leads us to true fulfillment?
Yeah. Yeah.
You could think about it for a second and know that.
Yeah. Yeah. The knowledge of God in our work leads us. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a great challenge if anybody gets to listen to this and they're in a space where they're thinking, yeah, but not my work. My work is dirty. It's tough. It's a 9 to 5 or a 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Yeah, I'm embarrassed. Whatever it is. It's a minimum wage. Whatever.
Right. I remember a teacher looking at me and saying, "You're stupid. You're never going to do anything with your life." And he named 2 professions, and I'm like, "Why would you say that?" Like, as if these people aren't needed.
Yeah, really.
I'm like, what a jerk. Not only was he a jerk to me, but he was a jerk to them.
Those professions, right? Yeah.
You're only going to do this with your life.
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
I think a good challenge for us as Christians, I mean, it can take, it really, I'm going to say exercise because it's hard to do, but I think is really important and true, is if you believe that God created the heavens and the earth, if you believe that God is real, He has a plan for you, everything that we generally ascribe to, our verses we memorize, then you must believe that in that moment, your 9 to 5, whether you're working a fast food or you're doing, I'm thinking jobs I've had over the years of landscaping or cleaning up after dogs or whatever the job is that feels so simple. I would challenge you, and I've challenged myself on this, find God in that.
Yeah.
And really think about, how is what you're doing it well, how does that glorify God? And sometimes the actual just act of doing something well, that by itself is glorifying God. And
right.
And it's, I would say I had one of my first jobs I was starting my first business, and of course I was making zero money. And so what I needed to do was work night shifts at a post office. I was working at what they call it, like a packages facility, and my shift was from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was just out of college, so I wasn't going to sleep anyway. Like, I'm used to being up all night doing video games or whatever. So, and usually I got out early, so I was usually working from 7 p.m. till 10-hour, 8-hour shift, 4 or 5 in the morning. Some nights it was going to 7. But anyway, that got old real fast.
Yeah.
I was doing my normal startup job that I was trying to build this company from usually 9 a.m. to noon. I was doing 3 hours of phone calls and sprints on that, and then I would sleep for 4 or 5 hours, and then I would go do this again. That was not fun. And I, of course, hated it, right? It was a necessary evil to pay some bills, school loans, and that sort of thing. I had now my wife, but I knew that over the next year I had hoped to save up enough money for a ring, right? So, and all these things on $9.50 an hour or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And there was a change. There was a dramatic change that happened when it's a funny story, but there was this space where packages come through a conveyor belt, and this is good to know as you're shipping things as well. Yeah. Packages on the conveyor belt, and there were big crates on wheels, probably about 3 feet by 3 feet or 4 feet by 4 feet. And each crate represents one of the 9 zip codes, 0 through 9. And that,
I feel like I'm on an episode of Mr. Rogers right now. I'm looking behind.
And that's how things are sorted, right? So the first number that matters, and so if you're mailing something by hand, make sure that first number is very clear.
Yeah.
Comes down the conveyor belt, I look and it says 0, and so I put it in the 0 basket.
Yeah. Great.
So I'm on one side of a conveyor belt, everything else is on the other side. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, remember those dynamics. So we've got a 3-foot wide conveyor belt, a 3 to 4 foot wide first layer of crates, another 3 to 4 foot wide layer of crates beyond that.
Yes. Yeah.
And then if you're shipping a 9 to California, that's 3-4 feet beyond that.
Yeah.
So now you're 12 feet away from these crates. It's basketball. It is taking these packages and throwing them, right? Yeah. So if you're a 0, you're probably from Pennsylvania, you're going to have a nice toss. If you're shipping from Pittsburgh to California for a 9, you're getting a good 15, 20-foot throw, especially if you're on one end of the conveyor belt. The reason I'm saying that goofy story is that we were having fun doing that, and I was watching these packages get destroyed. I mean, it happens all the time. And the reason it doesn't happen as much to you is that there are millions of packages every day. So just the odds are maybe yours got free that day. But I tell you, there are thousands of packages I'd watch just get smashed. And I started to think, I'm not trying to be goody two-shoes, but I care, right? So I started to think about those little spaces of caring and thinking about honoring these people. And I still shot some baskets, but I was careful about, what I was doing. I would take a package, I'd move it. I would not just leave a package sit there. If a boss said like, that's good enough, I would say, well, this came in the stuff that was supposed to be shipped out tonight. I'm still working. I'm not like going overtime. Let me just move this so that somebody doesn't lose 2 to 3 days off their shipping when they probably care about this getting somewhere on time. Did that person actually? I don't know. I never saw the end results of those things, but I found myself really finding that these whispers of God of care about this, do well here. And I found myself thinking about, this process could be improved here. That process could be improved here. And that mindset shift, it's a long story about the post office, never intended to say that, but that mindset shift for me of finding God in this miserable environment became a great muscle that I had to exercise over the course of months or 6-7 months there to find God in everything you do. And not to say this has to be the outcome, I actually had 3 or 4 months in, workers, whatever, say to me, a lot of them made fun of me. You're working hard, whatever. I had 3 people I could name for you that separately said, hey, you really care. I say, yeah, of course. I'm not trying to be heavy about it. And they directly went, 3 different people directly went, could you pray with me? And I said, they said, I can just tell you're really thoughtful. And I don't know if you're a Christian or what, but do you pray? I was like, yeah, I pray. And deep relationships developed. It was wild that level of effort became worshipful, that maybe it was doing this at 4 a.m, that everyone gets a little soft and weird. But again, that doesn't need to be your outcome. But in that case, God gave me that glimpse of do great work, fruit will come. And then those things have been really foundational for me on future steps. And so it's a long story.
But how do you cultivate that kind of care in something that you're hating doing right now? Because we've all experienced the times of unfulfillment, or like, man, this is not fulfilling work at all. How do you begin to cultivate that?
I like that word empathy. It was really hot a few years ago. I still think it's important. I like to try to put myself in someone else's shoes. In the case where I was 22 years old moving packages around, I had to believe that I wasn't going to be doing that forever. I had to know that. I did. And so I could right away feel like, well, okay, I'm not battling against myself here. I will have a different level of success. There will be growth. So I'm here right now. And in that case, I talked about putting myself in the sender's shoes. It was the case for me in landscaping too. There were times where I was laying out mulch, planting things as I go. I did a lot of that through college, probably age 15. I didn't have my own landscaping company, but I did it by myself, door to door, and just filled every summer with mulch, aeration, whatever. And you can really quickly, usually get paid by the job for that. Like I'll spread your mulch for $50 or whatever it is. So you don't have an incentive to get hourly. You want to get it done. Go to the next house. Every house represents $50. Why not? And so you put yourself.
Did somebody teach you that, or is that the way you thought?
My dad really made me go do that. Like you're talking about just going out to knock on doors and.
Well, I'm thinking about the difference between an hourly mindset versus a per job mindset, because I don't think that's natural for many people to think through.
That's interesting. I
think it has a lot to do with your environment. I would assume that your dad was like, okay, this is how you do it.
It was never a question for me to think about that way, because I know I could get, I could get the shaft, I guess, if I would get in too deep on a project.
Yeah.
But it also felt easier to me to think about units, I can do 10 houses and make $50 on each, and there's $500. And that, I have a sense on how long that takes me, is that if I spend a week doing this, is that worth $500 to me if I just lose a week of my life to do it? And the answer in that case was yes. And so I thought about things in big numbers, and also allowed me to sell myself better. And so I found so it was kind of a
you more
no-brainer.
naturally thought that way.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never really, no one
You can't go back
that.
can't point back to a thought, where you learned that principle. It just made sense to you.
Yeah, and I think.
Do you still think that way?
I think the salesman in me also just wanted to. It was an easier thing to explain, and it probably was. It took out negotiation.
Yeah.
And, so if I'm a 16-year-old, and I would say, well, you have to pay me $15 an hour. Oh, $15 an hour. Well, how many hours do you think it'll take you? I think it'll take me 4. I think it should take you 3. And now I find myself negotiating.
Okay.
With, in a way, like, I don't want to do that. I want to pick a number that feels, if I was trying to empathetically put myself into someone's shoes and be like, what's enough money that matters to me, but small enough to this homeowner that it just represents, okay, I don't have to do it, good enough. And a lot of times it ended up being people spend $50 on anything if it can just get out of, their mindset. And I would reinforce it with, I did have a little experience of, I could probably do this in 2 hours, whatever. And,
right.
And so the empathy popped up there. But I also think, when you're talking about that, how do you cultivate that muscle of seeing God in things? Take a step back in landscaping in this example and think about what this flower bed done well really does. Okay, this homeowner will appreciate it. Mm-hmm. This person just walked by me that I've seen 3 times already today because they're walking their dog so much. They'll really appreciate it. What type of I drive past it every day on my way to my dad's house. Okay, so those people are going to see this beautiful thing. This also opens up more business opportunities to me. It's a great way for someone to drive past, and I did get a lot of business. Hey, I saw what you did over at Joe's house. Could you do something like that for us? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And people trusted what I was doing at that point. And I think you were talking about your dad earlier and your grandfather, and I think businesses built on trust are great things. And so you get those positive outcomes, but I would say that the challenge to us is get outside yourself. You think about who else experiences or interacts with that product you're building. If you're working at Chick-fil-A or wherever, and you've got a choice to slop some stuff in a bag, or make sure you double check, make sure everything's in that bag. Think about, as a dad of a bunch of kids, right? Think about the impact of, okay, if this family has everything they needed, they're good. This family has one thing missing that a kid expects, it's going to blow the next 2 hours for them.
Right.
And that's the reality. Like, one kid's going to have a tantrum in the back because they didn't get the fries and their brother and sister did. And so I think that is... So this
ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes isn't natural. Okay, so there's a really good book called Psychology of God, The Psychology of God, by a guy with the last name Kolb. I think it's Eric Kolb. Okay. I was blown away by it. He pointed out in this book that have you ever heard of theory of mind? Yeah. You ever heard of that? Yeah. Okay. So from my understanding of theory of mind, it's the ability to say, if I were that person, this is what I'd be thinking, right? And he emphasizes in it that autistic children have a very low theory of mind. And how do you grow the theory of mind? It's by playing with others, making sure that children from a very young age are engaged with other people. Not saying that autism is a result of not playing with other kids by any means. There's many, that's complicated. Mm-hmm. But theory of mind is not natural for a lot of people to have. I mean, I can look within our children, There are a couple who have theory of mind very high, typically the younger ones who have to think about, man, what's he thinking right now?
Yeah.
What,
Yeah.
How do you cultivate that? How do you start to care? I'm like really hanging on this right now, right? So care. You care, but like, okay, why do you care? How do you cultivate care? You cultivate care by putting yourself in someone else's shoes. But how do you get the person who has a very low quote unquote theory of mind to genuinely care about what somebody, because are you tracking me on this?
Yeah, I am.
How do you do that? How do you inspire that? How do you grow that?
Yeah, there's, I mean, you're right. There's this wiring that some have and some don't as much, right? And sometimes it's as extreme as we've got medical labels on things.
Right.
But my third, he at age 8 months was so, I'd say, empathetic or aware of what was going on that when we might chase the older kids and I might chase each other, and there's just this moment of fun tension that builds.
Yes.
He would cry instantly. Something's wrong. I'm looking at my sister. Her anxiety just went up.
Yep.
He didn't even recognize fun. He recognized something's different. I need to get into this, right? And so his mind is like, okay, I feel that. The younger they got to catch up, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think one of the ways, even in business, and I would endorse this, to pull this into that business context and not just philosophical. One of my favorite things that the leaders we did at the first startup that actually became something, we worked with restaurants, and we made a software that would allow people to basically get into a wait line from their phone. And it created a much better waiting experience. Walking into a busy place on a Friday night, you got to wait 5 minutes to get to the front and then have a host tell you it'll be 45 minutes. And then you stay or don't stay, or if you do stay, they give you a little buzzer or they're yelling out your name, whatever. So we use technology to totally transform the experience. Great. Restaurants are crazy. Anybody's had a chance to work in a restaurant or own one, if you're that wild, that the peak hours are so important. 75% of your revenue comes in those Friday, Saturday nights or Sunday mornings, and very busy. So a lot of the things that we started to develop, this is an idyllic button for this, we should ask a server to hit this, or the host could do this, we realized might be a little out of touch. The way we built our business is myself and a few people like me literally worked in the restaurants. We would take our software, we'd work for free, and we started to understand what it was like to be a host at a restaurant or a manager for those of us who hadn't done that. And when you said put yourself in someone else's shoes, just think about that. I actually think even in business, as you're trying to create a mindfulness or an empathy, I think you actually take hilariously dramatic steps to put yourself in someone's shoes. We would work all the way through our board members. Every single person had to go through full training in a week of working at a restaurant, whether you were the CEO, a board member, or a support person.
Yeah.
And so now you're actually working, you're interacting with guests, you're hired. You're not getting paid, although, maybe they should have, but you're doing the full job. You're on shift. You're working 5-hour shifts. And when you go through that experience from a technology basis, you started to empathize, like, this button doesn't matter. There's no way someone could use this. What we really need is a simpler way to do this. Come up with great ideas for that. It also endeared us to our clientele and allowed them to know that we get what they're saying.
Yes. Help me understand that you understand is a question that I ask my oldest son, because he's at that cognitive age.
Yeah.
Like, no, help me understand that you understand right now. And then he'll repeat back to me. But that's the genuine desire of everyone we're working with, that I'm understood by you. Yeah.
Well, I think it's just to be strategic about really building your business. If that's in the mindset of, especially anybody hearing this, that, okay, this is really good philosophy, but how do these practically look?
Yes.
In a little bit later in my career, one of my biggest customers was Chili's, corporate Chili's, Brinker National, publicly traded, large-scale, multi-million-dollar customer for us. And those early tenets that stuck with me of empathy, get yourself literally in the shoes, it became a part of our playbook where we required it was a little less than 10 people from my organization that were going to be focused on our Chili's relationship. Mm-hmm. We required them to be trained as, they called them chili heads, but you were onboarded. You went through the full HR training. It took a little convincing on their side to let our people do it.
Yeah.
But we were fully trained. We learned their language. We learned all their And restaurants in particular have a really strong series of phrases they say or don't say, the way they do their acknowledgments of each other, the scorecards they use. And so now me and my team are trained on this. And they trusted us enough that you and I were talking earlier about the difference between agendaed and not agendaed experiences. I was put on the spot by a C-level person at Chili's to explain the entire rollout plan to 1,300 restaurants. I had to make it up because we weren't ready. He said, I need it now. I'm walking into this meeting. So we made it up. And basically I said, well, you've got 13 regions. He said, yeah. I said, well, each region gets a week. And over the course of a quarter, 13 weeks, we're going to be in each region. I'm going to have my implementation team. We're going to have launch parties. And we're going to invite everybody from these regions. And those stores that are a little bit out in the boonies, we can do some one-on-one visits. But we're going to invite 50 different managers to one big event. We're going to reserve rooms in hotels. And we're going to launch them. And I used all the Chili's launch language. And he trusted that I understood how, and he said, this is brilliant. So we launched, over the course of 13 weeks, we launched 1,300 locations on the software. And the president of the publicly traded company said to me directly in a final review, she said, her words were, I've never been more honored to see someone who cares about our business as much as your company does.
Wow.
This was the best implementation we've ever done. And I took it personally in a good way, but it was a worshipful moment in that this respect and interaction, they felt dignified, that we cared enough. We literally put ourselves in their shoes. We worked in their restaurants. We were trained that way. And that relationship grew by millions and opened up millions and millions more of other, tangential relationships sponsored by that. And so as you're thinking about business stuff, I can't overemphasize the importance of unscalably. You think, well, I can't make all of my employees go work for clients. Sure, but do as much as you can whenever you can, even if it's not scalable. Do everything you can to when you're talking about cultivating mindfulness, to actually go be in someone's shoes. We remember those funny sitcoms of kids that want to be parents for a day. So those episodes are always the ones where the kids are actually parents for a day and they're actually in charge and you see everything go wrong. And then the parents are also kids for the day and things go wrong for them and everybody gets this beautiful empathy for each other. I actually think we should do more of that. I really think we should put ourselves into the other person's shoes. What's it like to be a fifth grader? You and I don't know that in today's day and age. Right. So how can we really spend some more time around them, interact with teachers in a different way? A coworker who always triggers you. What if you were them? What's their home life like? What's going on? How far is maybe they're sitting in traffic for 45 minutes every day and you're not. What does that do to you? You sit yourself in traffic for 45 minutes and see how you're doing, right? And then, and as you start to think, I won't say you, but as I try to do those things, I become softer and more receptive and more listening. And it has allowed, those are business building tactics for us as well. Okay, but this is a sarcastic question, isn't that weakness? You think about today's day and age of what is a leader. Yeah. They come in and assert their agenda and, scream it loud. Whoever's loudest gets the microphone. Oh, man. And pushy, no empathy at all. Yeah. Right. And then if you're wired that way, like we got a couple punches on the mouth because we're wired, Lauren and I, we love people. Yeah. So I want to hear, specifically you think about during the pandemic, you have Black Lives Matter and, you have, I want to hear and I want to listen and I want to learn. Oh yeah. And then getting accused of being awoke.
What am I awoke? Crazy? Yeah, right. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. No, but I got accused of being at an Antifa rally because I was praying for the context of the story with a black man and somebody took a picture of it and we were in the city and he had a mask on and they're like, I don't know what you're doing at that Antifa rally. And I'm like, are you serious? Like I'm praying for unity with a brother, Yikes, crazy. Yeah, it's so weakness, I don't know, as you lead organizations, you've been everywhere, right? Do you get punched in the mouth for having empathy, or is that just in the pastoral world? No, you do. I've been recently, I don't know what brought me to it, but I've been recently going back through Enron. One of our lifetime favorite scandals of things. Yeah. And they were just a prodigiously successful mid-90s, early 2000s company in this era that was just the pinnacle
the climax of boys club everything. It was like a big locker room between their sales teams, everywhere else. You could break all the rules you want. Pictures of girls hung up everywhere. Rank the people in your office on a hotness scale. All the frat boy stuff that these 50-year-old men are doing, right? Like it, and then that manifests in how they do their financial books and everything else.
Yeah.
And at the time, that was how business is done. And I think and that was success. Like you wanna have success. You have to be callous. If you're a woman in that environment, you can't raise your hand. You gotta play the game. Wow. That's boys will be boys. You just gotta roll with it. That's locker room talk, and that's just what it is. And so we've just accepted that. And that was what's made a lot of people, I don't mean to put any sort of age around it, but if you came to success in that 90s and early 2000s era, late 80s, that was a lot of in business what you kind of had to climb your ranks through. I mean, you and I played football, and you know, there's a coach that just screams in your face, and you know, there's grotesque things that talked about in the locker rooms. You're a guy, and you just sort of roll with it, right? You don't want to be the goody two shoes, like, boy, we should stop talking about that, like, you know. And I don't think that's, you know, we should stop. I don't think you always have to do that, right? There's times and places for it. But man, I will tell you that the most life-changing moments have been when maybe it's a team member who works for me or with me, when they have come to me with a real problem, maybe it's a life problem, whatever it is, something they did wrong. And when I interact with them in grace, those are life-changing, gospel-opening, you know, just iniquity-shattering moments.
Yeah.
Because they're expecting a hammer to come down. They're expecting ruthless business. They're expecting anger and fury. And when you come back with love and listening, that's where I think the true softness and interaction happens. You want to talk about opportunities to share the gospel. Those are moments. Like when you should maybe react with fierceness and toughness, and you come back with softness and listening. That's what shakes things. I think we haven't talked. This isn't business related, but a lot of questions are, how do we talk with, you know, we said that big word earlier, woke, whatever. Mm-hmm. How do I talk with kids who are asking questions about gender or whatever? And I can tell you that an approach that slams a door in someone's face or bops them on the head with a hammer, or just showing them what true masculinity is by being strong and growing hair on your chest, that's going to end the conversation right there. And you have no longer any opportunity to interact, as compared to, can you tell me how you feel right now? Like this question of, it doesn't mean you're going to validate to say like, well, what you're feeling is good. I'm not saying that, but to be able to listen. And I think you are going to get bashed, right? As in that context, as a pastor, you're going to get bashed in business.
Yeah.
I've been bashed by clients or even other coworkers. I'll tell you the bash that hurts the most is by the person who you were empathetic with. Got an employee that you listen to, you got a plan with them, you're going to do this. They get pushed into a corner, and then they start to point fingers at you and say, Evan wasn't clear about this. We had this really nice conversation, and you're trying your best to listen, and those hurt the most.
Yes.
But it happens in business, it happens everywhere, and I think I think we can always do better. You were talking earlier, maybe before we sat down here, about
that is a very real situation.
Yeah.
And it happens.
Yeah.
And you're so right.
I think we can always be better. Like when we go through the circumstances, you're like, yeah, I guess I could have made this statement more clearly.
Anybody who says, no, I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, there's something you did wrong.
Yeah, we can say, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I can see how me saying this now in hindsight maybe could, like, you learn those things as you go.
Yeah, but when you give.
Yeah.
And you know, you had every right to be harsh and critical and judgmental and, you know, just lay down the law, you know, whatever. But you act in grace, and then it's not reciprocated. Man, that does hurt.
It hurts. I think, though, finishing strong on that is really important. Yeah, there's a lot of great.
What do you mean by that?
I think there's a lot of great Promise Keepers stuff out there. You and I were just a little young for that.
Yeah. I hear about it all the time.
Yeah, you know, but you know, there was a lot of goofy stuff too from that era. There's a couple of things. There's a book, last name is Shar, and it's called Finishing Strong, and it came from that era. He was a good big Promise Keepers guy. And he highlights both biblically and just elsewhere how rare it is for somebody to finish strong.
Yes. Yeah.
And his basic thing is like, if you want to be successful, whether you define success by money or what you should define success as with God, if you just finish whatever you set out to do.
Yes.
He's like, I don't even talk about hit your goals. I mean, like, you literally just finish what you started.
Yeah.
You will be a top 10% performer.
Paul said, I've run my race. I've finished my course. Finished the course.
One of the most powerful things from that book is he went to seminary with, it was a long list. I think it was like 70 some graduates, and he kept track of them. And he said 38 years later, it was something like 5 or 6 were active in the ministry. Yeah. So that's a shortcoming of the seminary. He said, unfortunately, this has been consistent as he talked to other schools. Mm-hmm. That he said it's roughly, at that point, it's less than 10% that were finishing strong. So I'm talking about the 5 have mega churches, and he's like, I'm talking about 5 people who were just like loving God and doing their ministry. And
the people I've been in ministry with through the years who've stayed in ministry are very few.
Yeah. And there's different seasons, right? Like, but when I said
when they were in it, we're going to be in it forever.
Oh yeah, they had no intent, right?
No intent to leave. Yeah.
I mean, and unfortunately, some of those are big celebrities. There's, even to bring up all the Josh Harris, whatever. That someone asked me about that the other day.
Oh, did I tell you he interviewed me?
No.
Oh yeah, it was awesome.
That'd be an interesting.
Yeah, it was on NPR.
I'll check that out.
I punched back a little bit.
Good.
And Lauren didn't, so NPR played her part, didn't play mine, and that's good. Yeah. Because I was like, wait a second, he was trying to back me in a corner.
Yeah, I'm sure he would. And
Lauren answered it much better than I did. I've learned a little bit since then.
But I think, in that context, you constantly get these intersections. When I say finishing strong of, okay, I was just, you were being tongue in cheek, but I was just purposely weak for a moment. I was vulnerable as a leader to engage with this person. It hurt.
Yeah.
You do an analysis appropriately to say, like, what did I do right or wrong? And I think it's very easy to say, forget that, and come out. And actually, I've done this before, right? Where I've been soft, get criticized, ego sparks up. Yeah. In the next room I'm in, the door, I shut the door hard, and people are on edge, but the respect I get is like, oh, Evan's not playing. He's serious. And then like the CEO or whoever's like, I see that. I see you're doing it right now. And that's addicting. Like, I'm going to be tough. And there's a place for toughness. When I say finish strong, I think it's you have that choice of, if you believe that's the right path, to listen and be empathetic and put yourself in those shoes in your business, to emphasize this concept of like, when you stick with that and go through those dips and valleys, the impact that you have, and I do believe the long-term business success that you have is far and above the ego trip that you get from everybody looking at you thinking you're strong. On that concept in business of creating the world how it ought to be, the more out of touch you get with your target demographic, the less effective your business ideas are. Yeah, it
makes a lot of sense.
Some of my favorite businesses I started weren't as much businesses, but it was when I was at college. I was really in tune with the campus, like the student body.
Yes.
Like, I was one of them. It was really easy to come up with ideas of, we should do this, boom. The school should have this, boom. And there was great momentum. It was like, school should open up this little shop, awesome, let's do it in the school. And the students were on it. We should have this type of campus party, boom. It grows, huge attendance. You're right in it. You're part of it. You're thinking of it. You are a student. And then you're able to pull yourself out and create something that someone else hasn't thought of. I think in culture, the more that we get into our ivory towers and our academics, we lose that touch.
Yes.
And no, there's like, Ford said.
That's why I said I will never stop counseling.
Yes.
To know the pain of the people who walk through the doors of the church. Now, I can't handle every counseling appointment, but I can never stop it altogether.
And it's not about just giving people what they want. That's that was I was going to say the Ford quote is, if I would have asked people want fast horses, right? Yeah. So you have to be in it and empathetic, yet somehow on that mindfulness separate yourself, right? Like get yourself, yes, you are in the weeds. You are moving packages at the post office. You are spreading mulch. You are making burgers, whatever you're doing. Take yourself out of your shoes for a second, right? If you can. Maybe it's after work, whatever it is. And, you know, as you do that, I think that's where you start to create better solutions. You start to create the world how it ought to be.
You're giving a pathway here of awakening people to a need that they don't even know that they have yet. Right. And that's what you did when you were working at Chili's. And
that was, I think about the gifts that we give.
And it's relational, not transactional. Like, yeah, there's transaction in everything.
Yeah.
But you are building relationship, building rapport, building trust with people the entire time. And that.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know if you'll agree to this. I love giving gifts. I rarely, I hate to have to do this, and I don't love people do it for me either, which is like, what do you want for your birthday?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you, but like if I really want something, I've probably bought it. I don't know, or you know.
Yeah.
But the best gifts that either you get or you give are the ones where I see you, I see your life, I'm around you a good bit, I notice something sparks that says, Zach would love this, and I get it, and it's not something you were thinking of, but it comes into your life, changes things, and you start using this in a way that's like, Evan, I didn't even know I need this in my life, and now I can't imagine going without it. Like those types of gifts, you get something like that from somebody. And I can name a handful of those. When I started getting a coffee for the first time, and now I have a coffee company, and I'm off to the deep end.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was starting to get into it, and a friend of mine he gave me a specific coffee type of machine. It was a grinder. I was like, I didn't even think about it. And the quality instantly, oh my gosh, it was wild how different this was.
Yep.
And I was like, you changed my life.
Yeah.
Like, this was, and that's a simple one. I think books satisfy that a lot.
Yeah.
And so the reason I say all that is in our approach to business, our approach to relationships, it's not just about hearing. It's not just about giving somebody what they want, which is a good feeling. I think God designed us with a slight, our confidence, or it's a dirty word right now, but I would say even a little bit of an arrogance, which is, I see what you're doing, and I have an idea of how it can be just a little bit better.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. I think it's important for us as Christians to act on that. Sometimes that means being a traditional entrepreneur and starting your own business.
Yeah.
Other times that means just doing something in your office. Yeah. Other times it means doing something in your family. It might be time to start to do family prayer. Maybe it's time that you and your wife start to read the Bible once a week officially together, or whatever it is. And you start to make those changes to move things in the right direction. And for me, that has manifested a lot in business context of I see maybe there's a lack of a software could do X, Y, Z, or an application of finances could really revolutionize this business.
Yeah.
Maybe it's sometimes a different sales model where you think everybody buys this product like this. But if they bought it like this instead, it would do better for everybody, do better for the suppliers, it's cheaper for the consumer, cheaper for the producer. You change models, the word we've used a lot in my career is disrupt. As you disrupt those things, that's actually worshipful. And I think that's one of the ways that we get to have our faith and work fully integrated. You're worshiping God by coming up with your ideas or integrating these slightly disruptive practices. Sometimes you slip and fall. Sometimes you notice the waves and you sink. But at least you're taking a step out of the boat to pursue what God's calling you to do.
How do you then disrupt without dishonoring? Because I found myself, I'll set it up as you think through that. Found myself, we started the church, we had a different vision than what we came out of. Yeah. And it wasn't that we hated the vision that we came out of by any means, but you always balance that tension of like, this is who we're not, this is who we are. And I think when we start something, we have a burden as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
There's a burden, there's something that can be better here. That's natural.
Yeah.
How do we not slip into dishonoring?
I have a really specific answer on this.
Yeah.
And I feel more convicted about this answer today than I would have a couple weeks ago. couple weeks ago, I mean, I've taken, I don't know, 1,000 personality tests over the years. Work always makes you do whatever. You know, some are more fun than others. I know my Enneagram, whatever.
It's so funny with those personality tests. You take 1,000 of them. There's 2 that you're the same on as somebody else. So you can find this common ground, but you're completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was one I did recently, and it was a top 5 result for me. And it was something I've never seen on any personality test, whatever. And it was called history.
Okay.
I was like surrounded by other concepts of like empathy, but then it was history in a top 5. I was like, what? That wasn't even like on the list of where did this come from? Mm-hmm. And it was elaborated in a more beautiful way. It was like, you really appreciate history. Okay. And I started to read deeply into, basically what was I answering throughout this process that brought them to this. I think one of the ways that we talk about disruption without dishonoring, which is a great way to phrase it, with a deep appreciation and a revisit of history, you celebrate where you've come from. Celebrate might be a little heavy even. You understand where you come from. And your progress is about building on foundations that have come before you.
Yes. Yeah.
I think this is especially true in an intimate microenvironment, a church that's trying to go from what's become maybe retirement age heavy into maybe you want new family age heavy, whatever that is.
Yeah.
It's really easy to accidentally get rid of the older generation per se and focus on the kids and the younger generation. But when you tell the stories of the genesis of a church or a ministry, or tell the individual stories about what that older generation has experienced and gone through and the why certain things are built the way they are, it doesn't mean that you need to continue in those things, but you get this empathy for what they've gone through, and you get to digest that as maybe part of the younger crowd and say, thank you, we're going to build on that and do things this way, right? And so as you do that, I think one of the primary businesses that I'm focused on right now is we're buying historic bed and breakfasts. These old houses, couple hundred years old mansions that were either hotels or mansions from back in the day. And they're not Airbnbs, they're traditional bed and breakfasts. Breakfast is served, we have staff that runs them. And it's an interesting industry, but we buy them in these old historic towns, and the ministry of it is, yes, we want to pamper our guests. We want them to have a great time. So much of travel, which is hot right now, so much of travel is about getting your me time. Walk into a place, high amenities, feel good. Ours, we do amenities, of course, but the real impact is you walk into a place that's a couple hundred years old, and you look around and you think, wow, this has been here a long time.
Yeah.
And right away, you're swept up in this concept of, maybe there's more to life than just me. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm trying to solve all the world's problems based upon the experiences that I've had for the 100%. Last week.
Yeah.
People have been going at this for a couple hundred years, but now you're like way beyond that. And you realize that you're a part of this human story of what God's doing throughout creation, and you're a part of it. And it's at the same time making you insignificant, right, to a certain extent, but you realize you are significant because you're a part of a significant story. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's really our Christian position. And so I think when we value history and we go back to a source of history, we study it, we understand it, and we learn and grow from it truly, we should never be afraid of that. I think our education, our school systems, when we train ourselves to be not entrepreneurial and to be 9-to-5 workers, employees of the state, I would say, right? Not that everybody works for the government, but that's your job. You earn a paycheck, and then you retire, and then that's it. I think our educational model, unfortunately, in the U.S. lends itself to that. You leave your family for 9 hours a day. You sit there, you're trained on how to do these things. You have a history class, right? But now we've got this issue of, well, just whoever wrote the history book, there's different types of histories to tell. And you take your test to memorize historical facts, and you move on. As opposed to this an education that would be filled with a why behind everything. How did math, 2 plus 2 is 4. Recently, there's some viral videos of the woke side of the world saying 2 plus 2 might not equal 4. It's all subjective. The only beauty in that answer is that somebody's asking the question of why. How did 2 plus 2 equal 4? What does that even mean? We don't teach where that came from. We don't teach how history integrates into math, or how math moves into music, and how watching a great film moves into art, which moves into beauty, and how all these things are integrated. And as I think if we educate that way, I mean, that's a whole different topic here. But I think as we learn to think that way and cherish our history, integrate our foundation of where we came from into everything we do, we earn the right to make wise decisions about where we go next. So I remember the first time I was 17 years old, and I had gone through a rigorous AP history class that really brought me up to speed on 1900s American politics. It wasn't a biased teacher. It was very factual, but it was this, how did things, like what happened when this tariff was put into place? And it was very educational. I said, I don't care if people vote Republican or Democrat. At that point, I said, I don't think anybody should be able to vote unless they pass a history test, because it was like, I saw so many of my opinions on what worked and didn't work form off of understanding where we came from. And I didn't mind if somebody said, well, Evan, you have your opinion because you think a tariff did this, but I think the tariff didn't do that. Like, okay.
At least they're thinking it through.
Good. Then you vote that way, I vote this way.
Right.
And let's have a dialogue about that.
Yes.
Great. But when it becomes more of this, like, actually, everything in the past was evil. Nobody understands me today. It's all about my exact circumstance right now. So I'm going to go ahead and throw out all the systems. I'm going to throw out all the businesses. I'm going to throw out everything. That's where the disrespect comes in. And honestly, forget disrespect. It's a waste of time, right? Like, you're not going to build a business that's going to last for more than a fad, and you're going to alienate populations against it, right? So I think that deep respect for history and an integration of that into what you do, even in business, I think the empathy comes in. We learned the Chili's process we mentioned before. That allows you to navigate that disruption without dishonoring.
And the attack on truth is fascinating. I'm thinking about how the implications of this type of thinking toward church history, toward, just like voting, like what you said, most people don't even know what the Constitution is, let alone why the Constitution was written, right? Yeah. It's just past this, you know. In history, as your friend, I could see that history really is a big deal, because you and I have a history, and, it's just easy to see when we have conversations. Education is something that I think that we should take a second crack at some point in the near future, because it's almost like we're starting a classical education, high school or something like that. We should
talk about that.
We should. It would be good, because it is a big deal to see beauty in everything. My burden, as I've expressed before, is that we're taught what to think as opposed to how to think.
Right.
And if we're not actually empowering people to think, then where are we heading? Where are we heading?
Yeah, the memorization. I love the importance. I see it in my life. For
little kids.
There are so many times that memorizing a Bible verse, is helpful. It is. That stuff gets written on your heart. But I love the journey. For me, it was probably between age 16 to 20, somewhere in that era, maybe a little before in certain smaller ways, where your brain needs to go from memorization into why, into some form of application, some form of realness in life. And I think in the pandemic, to make this more, we talked a lot of business here, so to pull this into that context, hopefully what becomes in a good way, a lot of people questioned the why of their job, questioned why they live in a certain place that they do. The pandemic brought us back. It got us out of the weeds, per se, a lot of us who were stuck in a 9-to-5 routine. And I don't think unfortunately, where you had said, I agree with you, that we aren't taught how to thought. I think one of our biggest issues as a American culture is we are finally asking the question why. We have no idea how to answer it. And so if I could put an age as to where I think our culture is, I think our culture is like 14 years old.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to ask really good questions. And our education system is not there. Our win first mentality in business is not there to truly answer the why we do what we do.
Right.
And
a generation is coming up and saying, well, what is success? If success is getting a bunch of money, having a bunch of assets, but never being fulfilled, never being happy, going through 3 or 4 divorces on the way there, why would I want that? I remember somebody handing me the book Winning by Jack Welch.
Right.
And so I go through it with my leaders because this is a reputable person
Jack
who gave
Welch.
it to me. I'm like, it's good. One of my leaders was like, I don't want to be like him. And I was like, you know what? Neither do I. Like,
Well, yeah,
like I did all of this at the expense of my family. And he's like cheering it at the end, you know? And you're like, what?
But I think that's really how we respond when even those, a symptom of this, I would say, is we see questions then of everything. Questions of gender certainty and you can go down the list of why? If this has caused this type of pain or this has caused this divorce or this money hunger, why do we do it this way? Why? I don't want to criticize somebody who asks why.
Right.
I want us to engage on that. I don't want someone to go through their entire lives and simply believe the pastor because he's a pastor and never question for themselves what God's really doing in their lives.
Right.
Because
as a pastor, I don't want people
amen,
to just come in
right.
and just say, oh, I believe what you believe.
Yeah.
Number one, they're lying to themselves, right?
It won't take long for them to get knocked off, right?
Right.
Like when you don't have your own foundation.
If I'm the only source of spiritual development in somebody's life, they're in trouble.
And I think
if they're only thinking, what do I think about this pastor? I don't want to create a bunch of spiritual dependence.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. My longtime pastor has always said, "I will let you down."
Yeah.
He's a strong man, but he says, "I want to be very clear. It's not that I might." And so he said, "I will let you down. So do not depend on me. Trust me, build a relationship with me, sure. Do not depend on me because I will let you down. Depend on God. Let me be a friend to get you there, right?" And I think in the holistic thing, all the things we're talking about, we talk about empathy, we talk about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, we talk about disruption and not dishonoring. All of those things, I mean, this is, again, it's a top score for me. But when we go back to this concept of studying our histories, appreciating those, putting yourself in someone else's shoes by training like them, thinking, okay, what if I was in their family circumstance? Sometimes going far and above to literally put yourself into their circumstance. You get to this place where that's where you talk about disruption without dishonor. I think that's where it all comes. That's where it all comes together. And I think businesses that do more of that, even if the product you're selling is not revolutionary, that you're changing the world with one product, when you do that action right, it's worshipful. Mm-hmm. When our education system, if you're a teacher, when you do a little bit more of that and you integrate multiple subjects and talk about things that God is creative. Even if you're public school and you can't say the word God, but you can talk about this beautiful integration of all these things. That's a great gospel message. You and I talked the other day where I said, great friend who's a world-class musician. And when we talk about, regardless of their faith in God, which is no faith in God in that circumstance, when they discover that they're being worshipful with their actions. And
there was a book by a guy named Sunday Adelaja. I think it was Adelaja. But he wrote a book called Church Shift way back in the day. This was like 2007, when I say way back in the day, where I'm just starting to awaken to different concepts. Right. And I remember reading this book, and he's saying, you might not be in a profession where you can actually take the word of God and quote scripture, but you can take kingdom principles wherever you are. Yeah. And so I remember talking to Lauren and being like, she was a teacher of 6 autistic children with extreme behavioral disorders. I mean, they were throwing things at her. They were nonverbal. Wow. It was a very difficult situation. Yeah. They were not ever to be verbal according to all of the testing and everything that they had. And Lauren would go into that classroom and she would speak the word of God over them and pray over them, but she wouldn't make it a big deal. She'd just lay her hands on them, and then she would just you can do all things, and then, through Christ who strength, one of those things. But she's taking kingdom principles, like anything can happen here. Every one of those children were talking by the end of her teaching. Amen. Every single one of them. Amen. Because you're taking kingdom principles, and this is what God's equipped us with. This is what He's empowered us with, is to take the kingdom wherever we are. And to work alongside of Him to establish the kingdom on earth. This isn't like a militant, view where we are, fighting in the Middle East and doing the Crusades all over again. But it's expanding the kingdom of heaven through our work, through what we do. And Renaissance came out of Reformation of the church. Yeah. Anytime the church had this big, bold, revival, we say, well, it sparks into the arts. It spills into beauty, architecture. You walk into churches, right? The old churches. Yeah. How many times have we thought, oh man, we need to modernize? Yet we don't think about the history of
why was it so beautiful?
Why was it this way? Even hymns that we sing as a worship leader, if we know the history of the hymn, where he wrote this after he came to Christ and he was a slave trader. And Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Yeah. Or he wrote, It is well with my soul, after his family dies. And he goes to the site and writes, It's well with my soul.
Yeah. And there's so much power there.
I'm not alone here, right?
And I appreciate, I think they're great thinkers, and there's certain groups have started to even bring back a handful of these choruses, and they add a little bit of different melodies, but Elevation with a new song that starts with Blessed Assurance. And as you sing and say these words, they're so powerful. That's an example of cliche, we throw the baby out with the bathwater in some cases, which is churches have a history of not spending enough money on the poor. Therefore, these old churches that are ostentatious and showy are terrible and a bad example of Christianity. There should be no more money spent on a church other than what it takes to build straw walls and a quick roof, and everything else should just be given to... I am all about ministry, yes. Let's talk about why some of those churches were built the way they are, and why Bach wrote the hymns that he did, and what those meant, and what what was happening. Even you really get into his chord changes and what was communicated in those, and you do deepen your respect for what that is, and that's where I appreciate schools that are built and take place in these beautiful old buildings, as compared to, well, it would be a better use of the dollar if we build this building. You mean the one that looks like a prison? But it's the cheapest thing we can do, and we equate cheap with stewardship. And I don't think that's... I don't think so either. Yeah, I don't think that's right. And you think about the quality. You study how the temple was built, right? In the Old Testament.
That was where my mind was going. It pointed back to the Garden of Eden. Yes. And it points forward to the time that God is going to restore all things.
This celebration specifically of the handful of the workers, and is it I forget his name.
Eliezer? Or what?
I think so. There's like a whole chapter dedicated to this one dude who was just fantastic in his craftsmanship and what he did. Yeah. And this guy never shared the gospel with anybody. And there's a whole chapter of the Bible dedicated to the work that he did to make something beautiful, because that by itself was worthy of a chapter in God's word. Yes. Because it was so beautiful. So, I think all these things, all of these concepts come together where I think it's our duty is not to survive the day, not just to survive the day. Our duty is not to be monastic and just pull our families away, save enough money to go buy somewhere in the middle of nowhere and get off grid so that the government can't find you.
Seeing a lot of that right now.
I mean, we've had a chance to make decisions like that in our lives.
Yeah.
And we've aggressively, although considered and chewed on it and understand how beautiful that is, aggressively chose to be in community. As we study the transfiguration, like the ultimate deified moment of Christ. Right after that, Jesus goes down the hill. He gets in with the people, right? Like he's in it. And he takes his time to get up onto the mountain to be with his Father, but his character is to be in and amongst his people. Right. And there are seasons, yes, there are seasons where you do go to the wilderness and yes, but...
In the monastic movements, I read a lot of books from those in the monastic movement.
Yeah.
The thinking is so rich, but I think we forget and we're like, oh man, those guys were just brilliant thinkers and they were removed in thinking, but a lot of them went crazy too and said some really ridiculously crazy things. Like I would say 1 in 20 is probably worth reading, and the ones that have stuck, you're like, yeah, that's a really good work. I need to do that. You have a 1 in 20 shot of not going crazy.
There's some really good, there's some good Jesuit stuff too, where, one of the rules generally was if you're in the middle of your fast and someone visits you, fast breaks instantly. Like if you're doing a silent fast or a food fast and someone surprises you, your hospitality and community is so much more important with them. And so you see these areas that do appreciate community, but the concept of pulling out of society, outside of unique circumstances, like Holocaust-like circumstances where you need to literally escape, right? And those have occurred over time where there is aggressive, widespread persecution. In our culture in America, there is persecution. But there are a lot of us, and we are strong. And I think being in your neighborhoods, having a church that is here in community, that isn't about pulling away, but about pushing in, is the proper approach. And so I don't, I think it's not that either of us are saying you have to pull away, but that's where I think with our businesses, it's not about just creating the Christian version of something, right? That's right. A lot of times I've done a talk like this and someone says, well, how do I create a Christian company? And that's really the prompt. I'm like, you do like make Christian pencils or Christian, that's not a thing. Make really good pencils. I remember the guys from Switchfoot got in trouble a couple years ago because they're like, well, we're not a Christian band. We're a band. We're all Christians. And I was like, oh, Switchfoot, I knew something was wrong with those guys. Right, their guitar had so much distortion, right? And when you study John Foreman's stuff, the dude is, maybe he's crazy at some, all the stuff I read of his, their lead singer, phenomenal. Yeah, like the guy, he's like, yeah, I love God. I love Jesus. I'm all in. I'm a musician. Not just I'm a musician who's a Christian, right? So.
Did you ever hear the story of Bono?
Yes. Yeah.
It's the same thing. He was like, I can't be a Christian and a rock star, so I'm going to quit. And his promoter was like, well, what if you were both? Like,
I know. And as a non-U2 guy, it killed me. And I went back and so deeply appreciated their music and his words. I was like, oh man.
Yeah. I loved U2 as a kid. I loved him.
I had to go back, and that's a good example of aesthetically, I'm not into it. But then from a music and art perspective, I understood what he was doing. Yeah. And it's like, it opens that world.
And he's harshly judged because of some of the lyrics that he puts in his songs of, his faith, he's a little edgy still.
Yeah,
right. But what if the person who was entrusted with the gift of Bono actually stewarded that properly, and instead of saying, "No, you cannot think this way," and he's asking, "Well, why can't I?"
Yeah.
And it's answered by somebody outside of the church.
Oh yeah.
What if that person would have said, you can do this, and I'm going to be a friend to you the whole way. I'm going to put my arm around you, and I'm going to disciple you. And
if this would be dramatic, but if I was, becoming a pastor today, where I was going to open up my own church. We do, there's worship and a sermon, and maybe do Sunday school, whatever, right? Like in different churches, there's some different forms of that. Mm-hmm. If I was being dramatic, I would make the small groups breakouts be almost entirely occupation-based in terms of not to send people out to war. Like you said, it's not Middle East, right? We're not trying to go crusades. But it's like this energize of, hey, this is a great experience, but it's not just about hearing the traditional sermon and then leaving. It's about a bunch of attorneys. What are we doing here that is creating the world how it ought to be. What does that look like in our skill set, our specialty, how God wired us? And I would love for those types of, not just men's group, not just women's group, or not just young families, college and career, whatever, I think there's such richness in this concept of what we do is a part of worship. And our testimonies are always about, like, I witnessed to these 3 people and they got saved. And that's, my dad is a salesman, and he is one of the best. He's been a full commission salesman for 48 years. Full commission, never salary.
So he's been okay. Either that or your mom has a great job.
And he has done well. And talk about learning to live on faith every day, right? Daily bread.
I want to sell one really large thing, like an airplane, and just retire.
And so he's wired to sell.
Yeah.
And he has done individual prayers. There's probably been thousands of individual salvations that he has done. And to him, where he's grown up with a lot of environments, we talked about 80s, 90s, and like the success at that time, it was a very strong evangelism in the Christian church. And so we talk about this as he's in his retirement age, he thinks about the successes of his day primarily on, did somebody say a sinner's prayer with him? And those are beautiful moments. But he and I are having rich conversation around, well, what about that roof that your team put on that house? Let's just talk about that. It's like, yeah, well, I was praying with her about her daughter. Like, no. I love that. Can we talk about the roof? Can we talk about, like, what you guys built? Can we talk about the process you used, the impact on that house, the neighborhood? Can we talk about this large-scale part of a redemptive move that's happening? Did that glorify God? Was that worshipful? And, he's so funny. It's like, yeah, it's beautiful. But you should have seen this prayer. And so, but it's a really fun, rich thing that I think our generation and I think Gen Z, as they're asking these why questions that we've talked about, I don't know if it'll be a fad.
I think it's our call. I think it's our call to bring that back.
I just think there's something there around being able, when you say that phrasing around not what to think, but how to think. When we can answer this question of why and purpose, and even from the political, as you see this on both sides right now, I think one of the themes of this upcoming election over the next 12 months is going to be an answer to purpose. I think in this election, and I think it'll come up in the next couple as well, it's not just about, give me this payout, give me this handout. I think you're going to see more. You're hearing politicians start to say, we're going to answer why. And it's going to be, there's different, sometimes that's answered with America's an evil nation that did everything wrong and now we got to change it. That could be a why. Could be it's a fantastic nation that did a lot of things right and we need to build on it. And then there's some in-betweens and different ways to answer that. And so I think we have culturally those decisions to make. I think that impacts how we educate. But as business people, we create the most often by what we do from 9 to 5, 6 days a week. And we can wait for Sunday, or we can wait till the voting booth. We can wait for unique, rare conversations over coffee. Wait till our last days. But I think we really have an opportunity on a daily basis to worship God in everything we do by creating the world more how it ought to be. We do that with studying our history. We do that by appreciating where we've come from. And we do that by I'd say applying a little bit of a God-given confidence and arrogance, appreciation of I see what you're doing and I think it can be a little bit better. And as we do that, everything we do, how we spend our money, how we spend our hours, how we plant trees and flip burgers and fill out spreadsheets, they become spiritual acts of worship, living sacrifices in everything we do. And then you realize I guess that whole thing about God being the creator of everything, that's true. And it makes, you'd said finding God in all that you do is really true fulfillment. I think that's our why. I think that's where when we can, you say, Evan, you use this word redemptive or this journey towards redemption. It's about that Garden of Eden moment where you get to walk in the garden at the end of a hard day's work and feel the cool breeze and be with the Creator. And this is where I share the gospel to say, that's our God's desire. Everything from the fall onward is to get back to that moment of walking in the garden with us. I look forward to eternity of doing work and being in the new Jerusalem, the new Eden, this new city.
Yeah.
Right? It was a garden thousands of years ago, and we're going to enter into a new city and be with God. And that's, to get to be a part of that is, it's not people say, that God exists. I'm so happy that our God is real, because it means that is our hope and our future. So I apply that in business, and we're off to the races.
Man, you did a great job. I appreciate you, man. As always, our conversation's so rich.
Thank you.
As you were saying that at the end, I thought about my grandfather again,
Yeah.
Every family function, he'd be sleeping because he worked so hard.
Yeah.
Rest was easy whenever you work hard. And he would look at, the sleep issues of today and be like, I'll tell you how to fix it. Here's a shovel.
Yeah. I mean, really.
But rest and work are together. And I do think that is going to carry out through eternity, because as it was in the beginning, so it will be, in the end. So
that'll be a beautiful thing, man. It'll be so cool to, I love businesses that do that give you work that is, it's hard, but like when you start to really experience, I think landscaping is a great thing for young people to do, because you actually get this quick, I cut the grass and now it looks great.
Yeah,
You get this quick,
return
on your investment. You plant something and, over
that's
a
why I do
season it
woodwork.
grows. Woodwork's great. You get inspired, and if you get real inspired, you're talking like that night. You put something together.
Yeah.
In a couple of days, you take a hunk, and all of a sudden,
craft it into something
beautiful. And then you see your kids use it.
Yes.
I think you know this, and I know you've done a number of tables, but like, if you did nothing else in your life by engineer the process of how we got our table and worked with your team and everybody else to get our dining room table, if you did nothing else, literally, like if you sat in a room, never shared the gospel, never did anything else, and just pulled the pieces together for that one table, you have salvation's credited to you.
Yeah.
Like that by itself, that table is already full of, and we've had it for 4 years.
Yeah.
So it is like that table being there at that spot is full of ministry already.
Yeah.
So like, in terms of
that's
like doing the right thing, yeah. And that's just one little, that was like at the time a side thing for you, right? So talk about the impact great products can make, great beauty can have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate your thought. I appreciate your friendship, conversation. You gave me a lot to chew on today. I love it. And I think everybody could see on the other end why I came into this not giving you any questions.
Yeah,
because it just kind of goes there.
Yeah, no, I thank you. I thought you asked some really good stuff, and we touched a lot of tips of a lot of icebergs that would be fun to go into. I think the education thread is super important.
We'll do it.
And I love it. And we talk business, church, and everything, and it's an honor to go across that stuff with you.
How can we get a hold of your Airbnbs? I want to go to one.
You can.
You have one in Savannah?
We have one in Savannah.
I saw
got a couple in St. Augustine, Georgia, or St. Augustine, Florida. Bracing for some storms today.
Okay, yeah.
We'll see.
What's your business name?
The primary one in St. Augustine is called Carriage Way Bed and Breakfast. And just look it up. If you type in bed and breakfast in St. Augustine, hopefully we come up first. That's the idea.
That's the idea, yeah.
But same thing in Savannah. You type in bed and breakfast in Savannah. That one's called Catherine Ward House. Okay. And have you been to Savannah?
Yes, when I was little.
Yeah.
I want to take my wife there.
It's fun. We're right on the main park, so it's a good, the park is one of their idyllic spots. Yeah. So we have a lot of fun there. Great. And you just get into the culture and the people, and we don't live there, of course, but as you get to know the
What's it called again in Savannah?
Catherine Ward House.
Catherine Ward House.
I'll text you, so you got them on your phone. You can look them up. But it's fun. You get some really you get really interesting people to come and stay with you, and usually people are celebrating. Sometimes people are looking for just an escape from life. Mm-hmm. You see people trying to get a good marriage weekend away because their marriage needs it. Yeah, you see a lot of anniversaries, and so you get to be a part of these journeys and celebrate with them, and they experience these old houses, and historically put into context.
Yeah.
And it's better than staying at a, no disrespect to Holiday Inn, great business, right? But staying in a cinder block spot compared to staying in a genuine 1850s house or whatever it is that has history and you can study that and really feel like you're there.
If Lauren doesn't have to bring her own sheets, that's a win for me.
She likes to bring her own sheets.
She brings her own sheets, but she would trust you guys enough
I think
that they're changed prior and washed thoroughly.
Yeah, that is one of our rules.
She had a friend who worked at a hotel and said, we really don't change the sheets and wash them every time.
Yeah.
So she said, I'm taking my own sheets. She's done that every time. Oh. So, babe, why don't you just request new sheets and put those sheets on?
But you could do that.
Yeah,
that is one of our rules is you must
gotta do
must change the sheets.
Yes,
so
I know you would do that. So appreciate you, man. Good job today.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.